You're fired. Now leave, or I'll have security escort you out. The manager's voice was sharp, every word carrying the weight of finality. Emma stood frozen behind the counter, the tray she had been carrying slipping from her hand and crashing to the floor in a deafening clatter. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stared at the man who had been a constant in her life for the past 3 years. The words he had just spoken sent a shiver down her spine. The air around her felt thick, as though the world had just tilted on its axis. Wait, what? Emma's voice trembled, her eyes widening in disbelief. She had been doing her job just like every day before this. She had served the customers, smiled, and given her best. But now, her world seemed to unravel in an instant, the promise of a steady paycheck evaporating like smoke. You served him. That's a direct violation of company policy. Kylian Mbappé. Don't you know how dangerous this is? The manager, Mr. Smith, stood with his arms crossed, his face unreadable but rigid with anger. Emma's stomach twisted. The name hit her like a slap in the face. Kylian Mbappé, the world-renowned football star, had walked into the cafe just an hour ago, an ordinary customer for her to serve. But now this, she couldn't understand. What had she done wrong? I didn't do anything wrong. I just took his order like anyone else. Her voice cracked, the sting of unfairness gnawing at her. You don't get it, do you? Mr. Smith's voice softened, but his words cut deeper. Serving him here in this establishment, it's not just about the customer. It's about the image, the optics. We're a small business, Emma. Do you really think we can afford the backlash? The attention he brings? You've ruined everything. The words hung in the air, suffocating. Emma couldn't find a way to respond, her mind reeling. This wasn't just about serving a famous face. This was about something darker, something far more sinister that she couldn't quite grasp yet. But she could see it in his eyes. He wasn't going to budge. Please, Mr. Smith, I didn't know. Her voice faltered. She thought back to the brief exchange she had with Mbappé, his charming smile, his polite thank you when she had handed him his coffee. It had felt so normal, so simple. But now, with the manager's accusations, she felt the ground shifting beneath her. You should have known better, he replied coldly. Get out of here. The door slammed behind her as Emma stepped outside, her world now a blur. She stood in the dimly lit street, her breath coming in short bursts as the shock of what had just happened began to settle in. Her hands trembled as she dug into her pockets for her phone. She needed to tell someone, anyone. Someone who would listen and understand. She clicked open her contacts, her fingers shaking as she scrolled to the only name that mattered. Her best friend, Nina, picked up after the second ring. Emma, what's wrong? You sound off. Don't ask me right now, Nina. I can't believe what just happened. I've been fired. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. There was a moment of silence on the other end. What? Why? What happened? Emma could almost hear the confusion in Nina's voice, and she felt a fresh wave of frustration wash over her. Because I served Kylian Mbappé. Apparently that was a mistake. A long, disbelieving laugh came from the other side. Are you kidding me? He's Kylian Mbappé. The Kylian Mbappé. What could possibly be wrong with that? I don't know, Nina. They don't care. I'm just a waitress. I did my job. Emma felt the anger bubbling up, threatening to explode. The world seemed to make no sense anymore, and every step she took felt like it was leading her farther into an abyss. Emma, wait. You don't think there's something more to it, do you? Her best friend's voice was suddenly serious, and Emma's pulse quickened. What do you mean? The way they're treating you? The way they fired you just like that? There's gotta be more behind it. It's not just about him being a celebrity. They're hiding something, Emma. The thought made Emma's stomach churn. She hadn't considered that. But what if Nina was right? What if this wasn't just about serving a famous face, it was about something bigger, something far darker? She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Whatever this was, she needed to find out. Maybe you're right, Emma muttered, but I'm going to find out what. And when I do, they're going to regret this. The line went silent for a beat. Then Nina spoke, her voice heavy with something Emma couldn't quite place. Be careful, Emma. There's more going on here than you realize. Don't make the same mistake I did. Before Emma could ask what Nina meant, the call dropped. Emma stood in the empty street, the weight of the conversation sinking in. What had Nina meant? What was she warning her about? Her eyes darted around the quiet neighborhood, and for the first time, Emma realized how utterly alone she felt. Suddenly, a black SUV pulled up in front of her. The window rolled down slowly, revealing none other than Kylian Mbappé, his expression unreadable. You might want to get in, he said coolly. There's something you need to know. Emma froze, caught between fear and curiosity. But what did he know? What was he involved in? Who are you? She whispered, her voice hoarse from shock. The world around her seemed to still. Mbappé didn't answer immediately, his gaze steady and intense. He finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Everything you think you know is a lie. The room was silent, save for the low hum of the fluorescent lights above them. Emma stood there, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to process what Vincent had just said. Pawn or fighter? The question echoed in her mind, the weight of it sinking deep into her bones. What was she supposed to do? She had never asked for any of this mess, this dark world she had stumbled into. She had only wanted to serve coffee, to live a quiet life. Kylian Mbappé stood near the door, his eyes focused on her with an unreadable expression. Emma's stomach twisted at the thought of him, his role in all of this. What did he want from her? Tell me what the hell is going on? Emma finally managed to whisper, her voice shaky but determined. Who are these people, and what do they want with me? Vincent's face darkened, and he took a step toward her, his gaze sharp and calculating. We're not dealing with ordinary people, Emma. This goes beyond anything you could imagine. There are strings being pulled from places you don't even know exist, and you've become a part of their game without even realizing it. Emma's mind raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. But why me? I'm just a waitress. Vincent smirked, but it wasn't a reassuring smile. No, you're not. You're a link in a much larger chain. You've seen things, heard things. You served someone who's tied to all of this, and now they've marked you. The only question is whether or not you'll survive it. The words struck her like a blow. I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't know who he was. He was just a customer. That's the problem, Mbappé said suddenly, his voice cutting through the tension. You don't need to know. You just need to be there, to be seen. They're watching everything, Emma. Every move you make, every word you say. And they'll use it all against you. Her heart raced as his words sank in. The dread that had been slowly building up inside her suddenly exploded. What do you mean, they're watching me? She asked, her voice rising with panic. Who is watching me? What do you want from me? Mbappé took a step toward her, his expression more serious now. This isn't about what we want. It's about what they want. And if you don't comply, if you don't play the game, they'll make sure you regret it. People disappear when they're no longer useful. Emma's knees buckled slightly, and she had to catch herself on the table beside her. Disappear? Her mind reeled. She had barely come to terms with the fact that she had been fired, and now her life was being threatened by people she didn't even know existed. She looked at Mbappé, his face unreadable. He was a star, a public figure, yet he seemed as trapped in this world as she was. You're not safe either, are you? She asked quietly, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and disbelief. None of us are. Mbappé's eyes flickered briefly, but he said nothing, his jaw tightening. Emma knew he didn't want to admit it, but he didn't have to. She could see it in his eyes. This world was no safer for him than it was for her. Vincent stepped forward again, this time placing a hand on Emma's shoulder in an almost comforting way. You're not alone in this, but you need to understand, they'll stop at nothing. They'll use anyone they can to manipulate the situation. They don't care who you are. They only care about what you know, what you can do for them. Emma swallowed hard, trying to shake off the cold feeling that had settled in her chest. And what do you want from me? She asked, meeting Vincent's gaze. Why are you here? What's your role in all of this? Vincent's smile was slow, almost predatory. My role? I'm just trying to survive, same as you. I'm part of the system. I help people like you. People who are caught up in all of this. He paused, his eyes narrowing. But I'm not here to make friends, Emma. I'm here to make sure you don't make any mistakes. The last thing you want is to make an enemy of the wrong person. Emma stepped back, her chest tightening with panic. I don't want any part of this. I don't want to be anyone's pawn. You don't have a choice. Vincent's voice was cold, dismissive. You'll do as they say, or you'll pay the price. The words rang in her ears, echoing through her mind. You'll pay the price. She had no idea what she had gotten herself into, but now it was clear. There was no escaping it. She was in too deep. She turned to Mbappé, her voice rising in desperation. You've been part of this too, haven't you? You know what's going on. You're not just some innocent bystander. Mbappé's gaze softened for a moment, but his expression quickly hardened again. I'm not your hero, Emma. I never was. I'm just trying to get through this. Same as you. Her eyes narrowed. You're lying. You know more than you're letting on. There was a long pause, and for a moment, Emma wondered if he was going to say anything at all. But then he spoke, his voice low and barely above a whisper. It's not what you think. There's a network, powerful people, dangerous people. They don't care about who you are. They care about control. And right now, you're part of that control. Emma recoiled, the weight of his words settling in like a leaden weight on her chest. Control, she whispered, her mind racing to comprehend what he was telling her. What kind of control? Mbappé took a deep breath, then leaned in slightly. The kind of control that gets people killed, Emma. The kind of control that can destroy everything in its path, including you. Her stomach churned, her pulse racing. She had been a waitress. She had no business being involved in something like this. And yet, here she was, caught in a world she didn't understand, surrounded by people who spoke in shadows and half-truths. Then why don't you just walk away? She asked, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and fear. Why stay in this? Mbappé's eyes met hers, and for the briefest moment, she saw something like regret flicker in his expression. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by a hardened resolve. Because I can't, he said simply, and neither can you. Emma stood there, her thoughts racing. There was no escape. No matter what she did, no matter how hard she tried, she would always be trapped in this web. A pawn in a game she didn't understand, with no way out. As the silence stretched on, Vincent's voice broke through the stillness. You're not alone, Emma. But if you want to survive, you'll need to trust us. The cold reality of his words hit her like a punch to the gut. Trust them? How could she trust anyone in a world that felt so twisted, so full of lies? But she had no choice. She had to play the game. And whether she liked it or not, the game was far from over. The cold night air felt even sharper as Emma stepped out of the SUV, her hands still trembling from the conversation that had just unfolded. She had just learned more than she ever thought possible about the twisted world she had been unknowingly dragged into. Power, control, manipulation. It was all there, hidden beneath the surface of her mundane life. And now she was tangled in its web. There was no escaping it. She turned to face Kylian Mbappé, who stood silently by the car, watching her with an unreadable expression. The city lights illuminated his face, but there was no warmth in his eyes, just an endless void, a darkness that seemed to swallow everything around him. I don't want to be part of this, Emma finally said, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and fear. I didn't ask for any of this. Mbappé exhaled sharply, his face hardening. You don't have a choice, Emma. It's not about what you want. It's about survival. If you want to make it out of this, you'll need to play the game. I'm not a pawn in anyone's game, she spat, her heart racing. You don't get it. I was just a waitress. I didn't know who he was. I didn't even know what I was doing. Mbappé's eyes narrowed, and for a brief moment, he looked like he might say something. But then he paused, his jaw tightening as if biting back the truth. The thing is, Emma, none of us are innocent. We're all in this whether we like it or not. You've seen things, heard things, and now they know you're a part of it. You can't walk away from this. Then what? She demanded, her voice rising. What do you want me to do? Sit back and let them use me like a puppet? I can't just let my life be destroyed because of a mistake I didn't even know I made. It's not a mistake. It was never a mistake, Mbappé replied, his voice cold and matter-of-fact. It was planned. Everything that happened to you, everything that's about to happen, it's been in motion for a long time. You're just the final piece. The words hit Emma like a physical blow, and for a moment, she felt her knees threaten to buckle beneath her. The air felt thick, suffocating. She was drowning in it. So what now? She whispered, barely able to get the words out. You make a choice, Mbappé said. His eyes locked on hers with a gaze that seemed to pierce through her. You either take the path that leads you down this road, or you walk away. But walking away isn't an option anymore. If you try, they'll make sure you don't make it far. Who are they? She asked, her voice barely audible now. Who are these people who have so much power over us? Over me. Mbappé's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a long moment, he didn't speak. Then his voice was a low murmur. You're asking the wrong question. The question isn't who they are. The question is what they are. They're not people you can reason with, Emma. They're an organization, a network. They pull the strings from behind the scenes, controlling everything. Your life, my life, all of it. They'll never let you go. Emma felt a chill run through her as she processed his words. Her heart felt like it was pounding in her throat. I don't want to be involved in this, she said softly, more to herself than to him. I just want my life back. I want to go back to when everything was simple. It was never simple, Mbappé replied. You just didn't know it yet. Emma stood there, staring at the ground, trying to steady her breath. Her mind was a blur of confusion, anger, and fear. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This wasn't just a job lost. This was bigger, far bigger. She had no idea who was pulling the strings, but she knew one thing for sure. They weren't going to let her walk away from it. She could feel it in her bones. She was trapped, but then something in her snapped. She couldn't just stand there, frozen by fear. She couldn't let them win. She had to fight back. She had to take control of her own fate. The darkness she was facing was terrifying, but it also gave her a strange sense of purpose. Okay, she said, her voice low but steady. What's the plan? Mbappé didn't answer immediately, but after a long, tense pause, he nodded slowly, as if he had been waiting for her to say those words. First, you need to understand something. You're not going to win this fight on your own. The people you're up against are powerful, far more powerful than you or me. But you do have something they want, Emma, and you're going to use that to your advantage. Use what? She asked, her confusion only growing. Mbappé's lips curled into a slight, almost imperceptible smile. Your connection to me. Whether you like it or not, you're part of a bigger plan now. But that doesn't mean you're out of options. It means you have a weapon. Emma's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? How is that a weapon? The moment you served me, you became a target. But you also became valuable. They want something from you, and you're going to use that to leverage your way out of this mess. They think they control you, Emma. But what if we show them that you're not the one they should be afraid of? Emma stared at him, her mind reeling from the implications. She was being told to play a game she didn't understand, with stakes that could cost her everything. She wasn't sure she had the strength for this, but something in her, something deep inside her gut, told her that if she didn't take this chance, she would lose everything. She would lose herself. I don't know if I can do this, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. I'm scared, Kylian. I'm scared of what I'll have to become to survive this. He stepped closer to her, his expression softening just slightly. I'm scared too, Emma. But sometimes, the only way to survive is to do the thing that terrifies you the most. You'll have to trust me, and you'll have to trust yourself. Because if you don't, they'll destroy everything you've ever known. A cold silence followed, heavy with the weight of their words. Emma's mind swirled with doubt and fear, but deep down, she knew she had no choice. This was the path she had to take. She wasn't sure what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. This was just the beginning. "All right," she said, her voice firmer now, filled with resolve. "Let's do it. I'll play the game." Mbappé nodded, his expression unreadable once more. "Good. But remember, Emma, in this game there are no second chances. You either play to win, or you lose everything." The words hung in the air as Emma took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The storm was just beginning, and there was no turning back now. The next morning, Emma woke to an overwhelming silence. The heavy weight of the night before clung to her like a thick fog. She sat up in bed, her hands gripping the edge of the sheets as she tried to collect herself. The shadows of the past few days were still fresh, vivid, and terrifying. She had stepped into a world that she didn't understand, and yet, somehow, she was expected to survive it. What had she gotten herself into? The sound of her phone vibrating on the nightstand interrupted her thoughts. She glanced at the screen. An unknown number. She hesitated, but something inside her told her to pick up. "Emma," a voice said, smooth and deliberate. It was Vincent. "We need to talk." She didn't have time to ask questions. The calm tone in his voice made her feel like there was no room for refusal. "Where?" she asked, her voice tight. "Meet me at the same place as last night. It's time to make your move." The line went dead before she could reply. Her mind raced as she dressed quickly, pulling on a jacket and rushing out the door. The streets outside her apartment felt alien, as though she was moving through a world that no longer made sense. She could still feel the echo of the events that had transpired. The conversation with Mbappé, Vincent's cryptic words, the dark promise of what lay ahead. It was like stepping into a nightmare where the lines between friend and foe blurred, and survival was the only goal. When she arrived at the old warehouse, it was eerily quiet, just as it had been the night before. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic. The cold wind cut through her jacket, making her shiver as she approached the large, imposing building. Vincent was waiting for her at the door. His cold eyes scanned her face as she approached. "You came," he said, his voice neutral but somehow laced with satisfaction. "Why wouldn't I?" Emma snapped, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "You said we needed to talk, so talk. I'm done playing games." Vincent studied her for a long moment before stepping aside, allowing her to enter. The warehouse was dimly lit, and the air was thick with tension. The familiar group of people from the previous night stood in the same corner, their faces unreadable. But this time, Emma noticed a different energy. It was almost as if everyone was waiting for her to make a decision, for her to step up and claim her place in this twisted world. "You've made your choice," Vincent said, his voice echoing in the stillness. "Now it's time to learn how to play." Emma clenched her fists, trying to steady the rush of emotions that threatened to consume her. "How do I even begin? What's the first step?" "You're already in it, Emma," Vincent replied, his voice colder now. "You've been part of this from the moment you served Kylian. You've been marked. The only question now is how you'll use your position, how you'll make your move." Emma's stomach churned at the thought. She was being played, manipulated like a pawn in someone else's game. She felt like a puppet, her strings pulled by forces beyond her control. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered, her voice shaking. Vincent's eyes hardened. "You don't have a choice. You'll learn as you go. The rules are simple, trust no one. Keep your enemies close and use your position to your advantage. They'll be watching, Emma. All of them." Her heart raced as he spoke, but there was something in his tone, something almost detached, that made her shiver. "What exactly am I supposed to do?" she asked, her voice hoarse with disbelief. "How do I fight back against people who control everything?" "By becoming someone they don't expect," Vincent said, his smile creeping back onto his lips. "Someone they can't control. You're more powerful than you think. They've underestimated you. But that ends today." Emma's breath caught in her throat. Underestimated me? She couldn't even wrap her mind around the implications. But Vincent was right about one thing. She had a choice to make. She could either sit back and let them use her, or she could fight. Before she could process everything, the door to the warehouse creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. Emma's heart skipped a beat as she recognized him. Kylian Mbappé. He looked at her with a blank expression, his eyes distant, as though he wasn't really there. "It's time," he said simply, his voice devoid of emotion. Emma stood frozen, the weight of the moment crashing down on her. "Time for what?" she asked, her voice cracking under the pressure. "Time for you to take your place," Mbappé replied, his gaze steady. "Time to show them what you're made of." His words were like a challenge, and despite everything that had happened, despite the terror clawing at her insides, Emma felt a fire ignite inside her. She wasn't just going to let them win. She wasn't going to play by their rules. If she was going to survive this, she would do it on her own terms. Vincent stepped forward then, his face a mask of calm. "You need to understand something. This is your chance. The people watching you are the ones who decide your future. You've been given a role, and it's up to you to make it count." Emma glanced between Vincent and Mbappé, her mind swirling with confusion, anger, and desperation. But in that moment, something clicked inside her. She had nothing left to lose. They thought they had all the power, but they didn't know her. They didn't know what she was capable of. "I'm not afraid of them," she said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "I'll show them who I am." Mbappé's eyes flickered with something, surprise, maybe respect. He nodded slowly. "Good. You're going to need that strength. Trust me, it's going to be a long road. But if you're serious, you need to make a move now." Emma took a deep breath, her mind made up. The fear was still there, lurking beneath the surface, but something else had taken its place. Resolve. Determination. She wasn't going to let them control her. She wasn't going to let them take her life. "I'm ready," she said quietly, her voice unwavering. "Let's do this." Vincent nodded. "Then let's begin." And just like that, Emma's world tilted once again. This was no longer just about serving coffee or making a mistake. It was about survival. It was about power. It was about playing a game where the stakes were higher than she could ever have imagined. And whether she liked it or not, she was in it now. The game had begun. The air in the warehouse felt suffocating, heavy with anticipation. Emma stood at the center of the cold, barren room, surrounded by people she barely knew. Vincent, Mbappé, and a handful of shadowy figures whose faces were obscured in the dim light. Her heart was racing, a war waging within her between the fear of the unknown and the growing determination to fight back. This wasn't just a game. She had been thrust into something far darker, and there was no going back now. Vincent stepped forward, his eyes locking with hers. "You understand the stakes, right?" Emma swallowed hard, trying to control the rapid beating of her heart. "You mean playing their game?" He nodded. "It's not just a game, Emma. It's power. You can either use it or let it use you. You're no longer just a waitress. You're a player now." Her stomach churned at his words, the realization hitting her like a ton of bricks. She wasn't just part of some conspiracy anymore. She was in it whether she liked it or not. And now, every choice she made could tip the scales between survival and destruction. "I don't want to be a pawn in their game," Emma said, her voice trembling with the weight of her anger. "I don't want to be anyone's puppet." "You don't get a choice, Emma," Mbappé said, his voice unexpectedly soft but heavy with warning. "But you do get a chance to fight back. But you'll need to play by their rules, until you've built enough power to break them." A cold silence fell over the room. Emma felt the weight of his words press down on her like a physical force. She had no idea who they were, what kind of power they held, or what she was really up against. All she knew was that she had to stay alive and maybe, just maybe, find a way to flip the script. Vincent turned toward a large table in the center of the room, covered with papers, maps, and documents. "We need to move quickly. They're already watching you. Every decision you make from now on will either bring you closer to your goals or push you deeper into their control." "Who are they, Vincent?" Emma asked, frustration building in her chest. "Who am I fighting?" Vincent's eyes darkened. He was hiding something. She could feel it. He avoided her gaze for a moment before answering, his voice a low murmur. You don't want to know just yet. Not until you're ready. Ready for what? She snapped. I'm already in this, Vincent. You can't just keep me in the dark like this. The less you know, the better, he said, his tone firm, unyielding. Trust me, you don't want to understand what you're dealing with just yet. There's a reason why people like you are always the first to be caught in this web. You're too innocent. Emma clenched her fists, trying to hold back her anger. So, what am I supposed to do now? Sit here and wait for instructions? Wait for them to tell me how to live my life? Not exactly, Mbappé interjected, his voice tinged with an edge of frustration. You're not just waiting around. You have a role to play now. People need to think you're in control, like you're one of them. You'll need to deceive them. Deceive them? Emma's breath caught in her throat. How am I supposed to do that? I'm not a criminal. I don't know how to manipulate people. You'll learn, Vincent said, his gaze hardening. You'll be surprised how quickly you'll adapt when survival is on the line. Emma felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She didn't want to become someone else. She didn't want to deceive anyone. She had spent her life trying to do the right thing, and now she was being told that lying, manipulating, and playing dangerous games were the only ways out. The thought sickened her. I'm not a liar, she muttered under her breath, barely loud enough for them to hear. Mbappé turned toward her then, his face unreadable. You will be if you want to survive. You don't have to like it, but you do have to do it, because if you don't, someone else will. And you'll be the one left with nothing. Emma's mind was spinning. What kind of world was this? Everything she thought she knew about right and wrong was being torn apart, replaced by a brutal, cutthroat reality that was so far removed from her former life that it might as well have been a dream. She had to focus. She couldn't let herself break down now. She had to keep her head clear, think logically. So, what's the first step? Emma asked, her voice more determined than she felt. What do I do now? Vincent smiled. A cold, calculating smile that sent a shiver down her spine. Now you prove yourself. You'll need to gain their trust. Let them believe you're with them, and then you start playing the game your way. Emma swallowed, her throat dry. How do I do that? You start small, Vincent said. You get close to the right people, the ones who can help you get ahead. You build alliances. You use your position to your advantage. Once you've gained enough influence, you can start pulling the strings yourself. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Pull the strings? What kind of person would she become if she played by their rules? What would she lose in the process? But what choice did she have? Who do I need to get close to? Emma asked, her voice steady now, though her insides felt like they were being torn apart. Vincent's gaze softened ever so slightly, but the coldness never left his eyes. You'll start with someone who's already within reach. Someone who already trusts you. Emma's pulse quickened. Who? Kylian, Vincent said, his voice barely above a whisper. You've already gained his attention. Use it. Use him to your advantage. The room went still. The tension between them was palpable, thick and suffocating. Kylian Mbappé, the man who had entered her life like a whirlwind, throwing her into this dangerous world of power and deceit. The man who seemed to hold all the answers and all the questions. Emma looked at him now, standing across the room, his face expressionless as always. Could she trust him? Did she even have a choice? But deep down, a small voice inside her whispered. If she wanted to survive this, she had to use everything at her disposal. Even Kylian. I'll do it, Emma said finally, her voice unwavering. I'll use him. I'll play the game. Vincent nodded approvingly. Good. You're smarter than you look. But Emma's mind was already racing ahead. Use him. She hated herself for thinking it, but it was the only option. Use him until I don't need him anymore. For the first time in what felt like forever, Emma felt something stir inside her. A strange, dangerous energy. It wasn't hope. It wasn't fear. It was something much darker. And she knew deep down that she was changing. She had no choice. This game had already begun. And she was in it until the end. The warehouse felt colder now, the walls pressing in on Emma as if the very space around her was closing in. She could feel the weight of Vincent's words, still hanging in the air, suffocating her with their implications. Use him. The phrase played over and over in her mind like a broken record. She had told herself she would survive, but was she ready to become the person she had never imagined she would be? Kylian's presence across the room was palpable, like an invisible force that tugged at her very core. She had no choice but to get close to him, to manipulate the trust he had placed in her. But could she really do that? Could she deceive someone so powerful, so untouchable, and not lose herself in the process? Are you listening to me, Emma? Vincent's voice snapped her back to reality. His eyes, calculating and cold, were fixed on her. You need to focus. The time for doubt is over. You don't get to hesitate anymore. Emma nodded slowly, swallowing hard. I'm not hesitating, she said, though the words felt hollow, like a lie she was forcing herself to believe. Vincent stepped closer, his gaze piercing. Good. Because if you do, you'll be consumed by this world before you even know it. You're already in too deep. It's sink or swim now, and trust me, they won't throw you a life raft. Her chest tightened. Who are they, Vincent? Who are the people pulling the strings? He smiled darkly, shaking his head. You'll learn who they are soon enough. But right now, you need to focus on Kylian. He's your way in, whether you like it or not. A knot formed in her stomach. Kylian. She had thought he was just a customer, a fleeting presence in her otherwise quiet life. Now he was the key to everything, her only hope of surviving this nightmare. But was he really the ally she needed? Or was he just another pawn in a much larger game? The tension between them felt thick, electric, and Emma could sense that he was aware of her internal struggle. She turned toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. You think I'm just going to use him like that? She asked, the disbelief in her voice cutting through the heavy silence. I don't even know who he really is in all of this. He's a star, a football player, not someone I should be playing games with. Vincent's gaze sharpened. You think he's any different from you? He scoffed, the bitterness in his tone unmistakable. You think he's just some innocent bystander in this? Kylian's no better than you, Emma. He's just another person trapped in the web, trying to stay alive. The difference is, he knows how to play the game. Emma felt a flicker of anger rise within her. I'm not like him. I don't want to be like him. That's the problem, Vincent said, his voice cold. You think you're better than this world. But the truth is, this world doesn't care about your morals. It doesn't care about your innocence. It's all about survival. And if you want to survive, you'll need to make sacrifices. You'll need to become someone else. The words stung. But deep down, Emma knew Vincent was right. She couldn't afford to be naive anymore. She couldn't afford to cling to the person she used to be. This world was unforgiving, and if she didn't adapt, she would be swallowed whole. A loud noise broke through the tension in the room, the sound of footsteps approaching. Emma looked up just in time to see Kylian walking toward her. His eyes were dark, unreadable, his face a mask of indifference. For a moment, everything inside her froze. She had to do this. She had to break through the wall between them, make him trust her. But as he approached, her throat tightened. What if he's already too far gone? What if he wasn't the ally she thought he was? He stopped just in front of her, his gaze steady. Emma, he said, his voice low but firm. We need to talk. About what? She asked, her voice coming out sharper than she intended. About everything, Kylian said, his eyes narrowing slightly. About what you're getting yourself into. Emma's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't the conversation she expected. Was he about to expose her? Was he going to turn against her? Her mind raced with possibilities, but she forced herself to stay calm, to look him in the eye and meet him head-on. I'm already in it, Kylian, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. And so are you. You can't pretend you're not part of this. He seemed to take a moment to absorb her words, his expression flickering with something she couldn't quite read. Then he exhaled, his shoulders slumping slightly, as if the weight of the situation was finally settling on him. Maybe I was fooling myself, he muttered, more to himself than to her. Maybe I thought I could just play my part and walk away when it was over. Emma stepped closer to him, her voice softer now. You're not the only one who's trapped in this, Kylian. I didn't choose this. But I don't have a choice now. I can't just walk away either. He met her eyes, and for the first time, there was a hint of vulnerability in his gaze. I know, he said quietly. I know. But that doesn't mean I trust you. The words stung more than Emma expected. She had hoped that, despite everything, Kylian might understand. That maybe, just maybe, they could work together. But he was right. She had no right to expect his trust. Not yet. I don't need your trust, Emma said, her voice hardening, the edge returning to her words. I just need you to stay out of my way. If you're not going to help me, fine. But don't get in my way. The silence between them was thick and suffocating. Kylian studied her for a moment, his face unreadable. Then he finally nodded, though the gesture felt hollow, like it was forced. I won't get in your way, he said, his voice distant. But don't think this is over. Don't think you can just walk away from this when it's done. You're in deeper than you realize. Emma felt a surge of anger, but she kept it in check. She had no time for emotional turmoil. She had a plan and she was going to follow it. But what would Kylian's involvement mean for her? Could she use him to her advantage? Or would he become another obstacle she had to overcome? As she turned away from him, she noticed Vincent watching from across the room, his eyes gleaming with amusement. He had been waiting for this moment, waiting for Emma to realize the truth of her situation. But the truth was, she wasn't sure what was worse, being forced to play a game that she didn't understand, or having to rely on someone like Kylian, who was as lost in all of this as she was. But one thing was clear, Emma wasn't going to back down. She had nothing left to lose. The game was on. Emma's thoughts were a whirlwind as she walked through the dimly lit streets of the city. The weight of her conversation with Kylian Mbappé lingered in her mind like a shadow she couldn't escape. He doesn't trust me. The words he had said echoed over and over. She had known he wouldn't just hand over his trust so easily, but hearing it from his mouth stung more than she had expected. But she couldn't afford to care about that right now. The plan was in motion, and nothing could derail it. Not even Kylian. She had made the decision. She had decided to fight back, to use everything at her disposal to take control of this situation. But that meant getting close to Kylian, playing the game his way. Use him, Vincent's words echoed in her mind again. Use him, and then when the time is right, take what you need and leave. But could she do it? Could she really betray the man who had somehow become entangled in her web of lies? She had no choice. If she wanted to survive, she would have to deceive, manipulate, and outwit those around her. The city felt different now. The lights no longer held the same warmth. The streets seemed unfamiliar. She wasn't the person she had been just days ago. The Emma who walked these streets had been naive, trusting, oblivious to the darkness lurking beneath the surface. Now, she was a player in a game she barely understood, but she was determined to win. As she reached the warehouse, her heart began to pound in her chest. The weight of what was to come pressed down on her like a leaden stone. She was about to make her first move, and there was no turning back. The door creaked open as she stepped inside. The familiar faces of Vincent and the others were there, waiting for her. But something was off. There was an unease in the air, an electric tension that made Emma's skin crawl. Vincent looked up as she entered. His eyes glinted with something Emma couldn't quite place. You're late, he said, his voice smooth, almost mocking. Did you have a change of heart? Emma stood still for a moment, collecting herself. I was making sure I was ready, she said, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. Good, Vincent said, his lips curling into a slight smile. Because we don't have time to waste. Before Emma could respond, the door behind her slammed open with a force that made her jump. Kylian entered the room, his expression hard and unreadable. You wanted to talk, Emma? He said, his voice cold, detached. Emma's heart skipped a beat. The tension between them was palpable, but she couldn't let it show. Yes, she said, her voice betraying none of the anxiety she felt. We need to move forward. We need to make them believe I'm on their side. Kylian stepped closer, his gaze locking onto hers. And what do you want me to do? You think I'm just going to help you manipulate them? Emma's breath caught in her throat. She had known this was coming, but it still hit harder than she expected. You don't have a choice, Kylian, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. We're in this together now, whether you like it or not. There was a long pause as Kylian studied her, his jaw tightening. Then, without a word, he turned away and walked toward Vincent, his expression unreadable. Emma's pulse quickened. What was he thinking? What was he going to do? She had to get him on her side. If he didn't help her, everything would fall apart. Vincent watched them both, a sly smile playing at the corners of his mouth. You two have some unfinished business, I see. Well, don't take too long. We have a plan to execute. Kylian didn't look at Emma again. Instead, he addressed Vincent. I don't trust her. She's playing a dangerous game, and I don't think she knows the rules. Emma's heart sank. He doesn't trust me. The words stung more than she cared to admit. Vincent's expression darkened. She's not the only one who's playing.